Where we attach our gauges is called a service port, but this entire piece is called a service valve. And we have the suction side and the high side. When we close this valve, it will separate one side from the other. If we look in the very top of this valve, we have this hole in here with this hex key. We're going to have this tool, which we call a service wrench or a ratcheting service wrench, with our adapter. It's cool because this size right here fits in that hole. So we're going to put these together, and this is all the way open. So if we look at it, this valve is all the way up and allows the refrigerant to flow through this like it's not even there. We can also see the little hole for our service valve. What I'm going to do is take that service port out so we can identify it better. Now if we look through there, we can see the light where our service port goes. What I'm going to do is I'm going to close this valve off so you can see that action happening. Now this valve is entirely closed. So this side can go up to here, but it can't go any farther. This side, however, has a little groove on it. And what's cool is that little groove connects to our service port. So our service port allows us to still do work on this side of the system, but isolates it and seals this side off. A lot of times when you buy new equipment, it'll come charged with refrigerant up to this point. When you get through doing your vacuum recovery and recharge, which we'll discuss later, then you open this port. So we set our key to back up. And now the service port is open. So when it's open, you see it's backed all the way in, and some of these have this nice little keeper ring that stops you. Make sure you stop at that point. I've had helpers before that were power their way through it, and once this pin unscrews all the way out, you lose the entire refrigerant charge, which is a bad thing. So once we screw it in, you can see the difference. It's all the way down, and this is what it would look like. So if you wanted to check, you could take this cap off and you look inside to see. Here's an example with the cap on, and here's an example with the cap off. So it's very important if you're doing any service work, you want to make sure you don't overheat these valves. Later we're going to talk about brazing. Notoriously, new techs will overheat the fitting and they melt an O-ring that fits inside of here, and they melt the seal, and it causes refrigerant to leak out the top. So with that cap on there, make sure you protect this when you're brazing it. It's going to last a very long time. Occasionally you're going to run into a situation where you have to replace one. They do make universal ones, and these are really cool. You have your service port over here beside it. You have a ball valve, and it's long enough distance, it's easy to work on. You have a place you can screw it and mount it at the bottom. You can actually take your adjustable wrench and loosen this just a little bit, and you can take your adjustable wrench, connect it to the flat spot here, and if you turn it this way, you've now stopped the flow of refrigerant. And if we look through here, there is no flow of refrigerant. You can actually see the brass in the inside. If we take and open this up, now it's in line, and we look through here and we can see all the way through the other side. I really do like these ball valves. They do cost a little bit more, so manufacturers will use these other kinds instead, but when it comes to universal replacements, I love these. This is what I use, and this is what I stock in a truck. So this is a ball valve, standard valve. We do have another type of service valve. We have this one here. This particular one mounts on a compressor, but this is a forward, mid, and back seat valve. If we put our tool on here, we actually have to crank this in a little bit, and it opens this port up. With it back seated, now it's back seated, this port is shut off. There is no Schrader valve inside of here. So when you want to hook your gauges up to it, you screw your gauges on, and then you take this and just turn it in a little bit, and allows refrigerant from the two pipes to come through to your hose to your manifold gauge set. And then when you took your before you took your gauges off, you would back this up to back seat it. Now if you want to do work on the system, you wanted to close the valve entirely, you would crank this all the way down. By cranking it all the way down, it would allow your service port to be open only to one side, but it would stop the flow of refrigerant. So these are very popular valves, especially in the older carriers, and they're used exclusively in refrigeration. If If you see one of these kind of valves, make sure you refresh yourself, because new technicians will close them all the way trying to hook gauges on, and it'll actually burn out a compressor while it's running. And the other times I've seen is new technicians will forget to open it all the way back up. Because they don't open it all the way back up, let's say that we left it mid-seat, they take the gauge off and now liquid refrigerant shooting out. I've had more than one time people new to the trade see that refrigerant coming out, they panic and they try to cover it up with their hands. That's liquid refrigerant boiling at minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit or lower, and that will cause severe frostbite in the hands and long-term damage. So you want to make sure you have your tool, you want to make sure that you back seat this before you take your gauges off so you don't get hurt. And as you go through time, we'll talk more about this in the commercial side, but it is a very popular valve. Now, there's another term we need to know. All of these are service valves. There's ball valves, service valves, open front valves, mid-seat valves, but they're all service valves. A lot of people try to call these king valves, and none of these are king valves, not even this one. A king valve is specifically where that valve is located. Here's the refrigeration system. This is on my compressor itself. We have valves. We can take this cap off and we can put our tool on this valve. We have to thread this in a little bit to get access to our service port. That's called mid-seat. If I close it all the way, it's front-seated. I have another one here. It's back-seated right now. We take the cap off, we thread it in a little bit, mid-seat it, we can get pressure for our gauges, and if we screw it all the way closed, it separates this component from that component. These are also a type of service valve. These are still not king valves. However, this unit has a receiver on it. It's a liquid receiver, which we'll talk about later. This has a king valve. A king valve is located on the exit of the liquid receiver. So because this valve and this valve look identical, it's where that valve is located. That makes this one a king valve. Now you can see the king valve and these other valves look very similar. A king valve, again, is where this is located. This cap still has to come off. We can backseat it where this gauge is shut off. We can thread it in a little bit where we can hook our gauges up to it, and we can thread it all the way closed where it separates them. Now people call this a king valve, people call this a king valve, people call this a king valve, and people call that a king valve, but in reality, this is the only true king valve. Now don't argue with people, don't try to correct everybody, hey, that's not the right terminology. I'm not telling you this information so you can use it to go to battle. I'm telling you this information because when you work with a true refrigeration guy, they know the difference between a true king valve, its location and placement, versus the other valves. And if you really want to make an impression with the refrigeration guys, and also to know your proper vocabulary, it's a really great way to start. Like I say, don't be arguing with everybody, because everybody seems to call every valve in the world a king valve, but this is a true king valve. The king valve. One last valve I want to show you, and there's many more, but this valve actually has the cap that we could open and close. This valve looks similar, but it's different. This valve was used by Lennox for a while, and it was a one-time use valve. We still have our service port, but this pin would be sticking up on the very top. When you had a brand new unit, you would thread this cap in, and it would push that pin all the way down, breaking a seal and shoving it to the bottom. Then it would allow the refrigerant to flow. It was a one-time use valve. So if you see one of these style valves, there's really no way to close this valve again. Once it's opened, it's always going to be open inside. So I don't know that they still make these, but I did have a student come back and he was very concerned of how to close this valve again. And I just want to make a little quick demonstration of what that valve is. I don't know the proper name of that valve, a one-time valve, I'm not sure. But either way, these may even not be relevant. You may not even see these anymore, but there are all kinds of valves and they're still making new stuff today.